Bibles to Matthew chapter 22. Keep a finger there. Also, if you have your Bibles, Exodus 20. If you don't have your Bibles, use your smartphone. You can access the YouVersion, Y-O-U version Bible app. Find the Events tab, touch that. You'll find Hope Community Church come up, hit that again, and all the notes will come up today. Because we don't have a screen, right, we do have printed notes available for you. Our ushers will make themselves available to you. If you would like printed notes to help you follow along, just raise your hand and they will bring one to you, all right? Don't worry, there's no test at the end. Last week we began our series that we are calling First Love, and what we realized is first love is not that crush you had in grade school. It wasn't that first real love maybe you had as a young adult or in high school. It's not even, your first love is not even for God himself or for Jesus. But rather, the first love you experienced in your life is God's move of love toward you. We love him. We are able to love other people because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19, we love each other because he loved us first. So last week I argued that most of us, and I would even say all of us, don't really know what that love's about. We have not really experienced it. I mean, we have it up in our heads, and perhaps even we grew up singing the songs, you know, Jesus loved me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And we say, yep, the Bible says that, but do we really know it? So much so that we experience it, so much so that it dramatically affects how we live our lives. Because there's evidence, right, in my life, in your life, that we just don't know that love. And perhaps growing up, you know, we experience love in part through our parents and maybe through a spouse, but it hasn't been a perfect love, and it's kind of left us with a distorted view of what love is, and in turn, we distort that view of love onto God. So it's really, I just want us to say it's important as we're walking through this that we grab a hold of what first love means, because it's going to change everything in your life. It's going to change how you respond to people. It's even going to change your emotional health. It's going to change your very well-being. It's going to change, if we could grab a hold of this and experience it, what motivates us to get out of the bed in the morning. To know it and to experience. And just so you know, knowing Jesus is not just so you can escape hell. Knowing Jesus, he says, is so that you might have an abundant life. And that abundant life surrounds this love. So today, just so you know, we're going to have kind of a serious conversation. All right? We're going to have a serious conversation about what is in our life that's conflicted, or that gets in the way of us experiencing this first love. So if you have said yes to Jesus, I just want you to know ahead of time that what you hear today, I want you to hear it in the context of Jesus' great love for you, in the context of God wanting his best for you. And at the same time, I really do hope that all of us, myself included here, experience some conviction about what we're going to look at today. And the answer to that conviction is not you just working harder at your Christian life. The answer to that conviction is not you drumming up some more willpower. The answer to the conviction I hope you experience is love. The answer is, how do I press into this Christ love for me? And so just the story of what we're going to talk about today is throughout your entire Bible. Because Jesus was very, very clear that our response to God is not just an obedience, like, okay, I just got to have enough willpower. Our response to God is love. Think about Jesus' greatest commandment in our lives. You've heard this before. Jesus replied, what's the greatest commandment? You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. In other words, with your entire being, you must love God. We're called to that. But here's what I want to talk about today. These conflicts of receiving love and then loving him in return. And here's the conflict. We have other lovers in your life. I mean, do you know you have other lovers? All of you do. Even if you're married, you have other lovers. And these lovers you love, and they in turn love you back. Now, how many of you, and I know this doesn't include any of you in this room, how many of you had a friend like in high school or college or as a young adult that was playing the dating game where they had a number of different lovers? They dated 2 or 3 people at the same time? Only a few of you. The rest of you are not brave enough to answer that question. But you know there was tension in their life. How could they give of themselves to a number of these different lovers? And every once in a while, right, we hear on the news of, this person, usually it's a guy, this guy, who has 2 families in 2 different states trying to live 2 different lives. Well, this is often how God describes us, or God describes his people throughout the Bible. Very often God says, you have other lovers. And God uses rather strong words. You're acting like a harlot. You're acting like an adulterer. You're rejecting me, and you keep looking for love from other people. And this imagery grows and is really stark in the book of Hosea, with how the nation of Israel, in their unfaithfulness to God, has these other lovers. And so God has been really clear on this, right? You know that. And this goes back to the 10 Commandments, the very first saying of the 10 Commandments found in Exodus 20. God says this through Moses, I am the Lord your God who rescued you out of the land of Egypt, the place of slavery. You must not have any other God but me. So out of great love for his people, right, he rescued them, he saved them, he provided them for them, he gave them the promised land. And all he asked for was love in return. You must not have any other gods. Verse 4, you must not make for yourself an idol or any kind of image or anything in the heavens, on the earth, or in the sea. You must not bow down to them in worship of them, for I, the Lord your God, I'm a jealous God, and who will not tolerate, and here's a key word, your affection. Circle that word if you're taking notes, your affection for any other God. That's what I want to talk about today. So back then, people would take the materials of the world, and they would take an image from the world, and they would carve or they would sculpt this image, and they would, worship that image because they believed that if they did that, it would bring protection. It would bring blessing. You've even heard of fertility gods. If they, worship this image, then they could have children. They trusted that these gods would take care of them, and so they worshiped them. These idols, we could say, would be things that they loved, or could we call them other lovers? I think we could. So I want to connect that to today's time. So I grew up, going to Sunday school and church and Christian school, and whenever there was this talk on idols, they would say, we have idols too in our lives today. And every time I heard that, I thought, I don't know. That's a stretch, right? That's a stretch comparing, worshiping some wooden figure or some metal statue to, today maybe we have, the love of money and our priorities are a little whacked up. But, I believe in one God. I'm saying yes to Jesus. How could we have other idols? I just thought it was like, grasping at straws and trying to connect it to today. But then I've kind of come around full circle because of this word affection. You must not have affection for these other gods. So there's been a shift. Because I think it's these affections that make promises to us. If you love me, I will give you this in return. And this affection for these other lovers in our life, it conflicts with this first love that we have from God. So I know many of you, you're obviously in church today, and you say, no, I only worship God, and I get all that. It's not how you would feel. So I'm going to ask you some questions, if I could. Just some questions that I hope would get you thinking that perhaps this is a possibility in your life, that you have this, can we say idol worship going on, that we have this other lover thing happening. Some questions for you to think about. So here's the first one. Where do you go to get help? So honestly, think about this. When something comes up at work or at school or your health crisis, primarily, where do you go for help? You might say a quick prayer, but in your heart of hearts, Who do you trust? What's your first inclination? Who do you talk to? How do you go about figuring out whatever problem it is you need help? Okay, next question. Where do you go for blessing in life? I mean, really, where do you go for blessings? In other words, where do you look for provision? Like the things that you have, where does it really come from? And I think growing up in our tradition, we'd say hard work, right? So if I do X and Y and Z, and I kind of plan that out, then I will receive this. I work for so many years, and then I can provide for my family, or I can save enough away for retirement. Or maybe in the beginning of life, if I work hard enough, I can get my own house. Check your hearts on that one. Who really provides for you? I mean, really, what do you believe? And then where do you go to get the right information? In other words, when there's an issue in your life, you want to know about something or how to, maybe you got some marital problems, or you have trouble parenting your kids, or you got this neighbor or boss. Where do you go to get the right information to help you live a right life? To help you get along better in life? Call it whatever you want. Self-help. Next question. Where do you spend all your extra time? So make no mistake about it, other lovers, as we've said, demand time. If you're one of those people who try to date multiple people, you're scrambling for time. How do you juggle that? That's true of any lover. They're always asking for more. So what do you do in your extra time? Just let that settle in a little bit. Think a little bit on that right now. And lastly, where do you go for comfort? So when you're stressed, overwhelmed at work, or whether it's a major issue in your life or a small issue, where do you go to maybe just forget about your problems or to somehow ease the pain of that problem? Who or what is the source of comfort in your life? So these questions, I really think, get at all the same reasons the people back in the Bible times, right, made idols. Because back then, it was more than just superstitious beliefs. It came out of who or what they were trusting. We could say who or what they were loving. You see where I'm going with this? So throughout the story of God, there are these things that get in the way of our affection for Him, of experiencing true love for Him. And very often we are seeking to get our needs met from places that are other than Him, other lovers than He is. So once again, I'm going to walk through some of those things this morning and actually next week as well. And so I don't want you to experience what I would call, if you know Jesus, what I would say condemnation around this, or even shame around this. This is not like the pastor up here trying to slap you on the hand, with a ruler and say, "You dummy, get your life together." It's not about that. It's really trying to ask yourself, who or what do I really love? And then if I realize that my love is falling short, it's not, the answer to that is I need to experience more of Christ's love for me and then love Him in return. All right? So just keep that in mind as we walk through these things. What are some of the other lovers in our lives? The first one, and I have it in quotes, the word good, and I'm calling it the good life. And I would argue it's another lover. And I would also put it as small g. What are some other gods in our life? Because it is wanting your affection, and it is promising you something. So it's true if we think about it. This American good life is constantly calling out to us. So much so that I would say all of us in some part, and most of us in large part, we base our lives on it. And it starts right from the beginning. It starts from what our parents did, what our grandparents did, how history has repeated itself over and over again. It's the reason you went to school. You wanted to have, or they told you wanted to have, a piece of the good life. And that's why you got an education. And then when you're done with school, there might be some more training on the job, or there might be some more education you had to go to. And so then you base all your career decisions and what you're going to do in life based upon pursuing, quote, the good life. And we kind of can put some things into what that good life means. Okay, I guess, I want to get married or, have a house. And I think the average is like, okay, 2.5 kids and 1.3 pets or whatever it is. And, have some nice things, go on some trips. The good life is I want to be able to go out to eat every once in a while. For my kids, I want to have money for them so they can have opportunities for fun things. And all of what we live for has been instilled since day one. And it really becomes the motivator for how we live our lives. And we want God to be a part of that good life, don't we? Because if we go to church, if we're here, then God will bless us with more of this, our definition of good life. And it promises us so much. That's what we want. It promises us happiness, fulfillment. It promises to meet our desires if we give it our affection. And we've grown to trust it. But very often, and I would say most often, it leaves us disappointed. Very often, if this is what our lover is, it fills us with fears and anxieties because we're afraid we might lose a piece of this good life. What might happen? We are afraid, what if I won't be able to attain it? What if I won't be able to have this or that or retire? It fills us also, right, with jealousy and envy. We see the good life the neighbors are having or the coworker is having. Okay, if I just work a little harder, do a little bit more, a little more XYZ, then I could have that good life. We think that life over there is, quote, gooder than our lives. But it never satisfies because there's always something wrong with the lover. It's always... This lover just doesn't quite meet our expectations. And it's fickle, isn't it? It can fall apart. The relationship gets broken. The marriage happens. Or then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's this accident and it disrupts it. Or a divorce, and all of a sudden we're sharing the kids now. Or we spend so much time loving this lover, and over again, it lets us down, but we still keep worshiping it. If our first family, if our first house doesn't work out, we'll try again. We'll get another one. Or maybe we'll get a better house next time, or a better car, or more toys. Now, so how do I know that, God's blessings are great in our life, right? And if God chooses to bless us in a number of ways, that's awesome. But I'm just trying to say, look at your heart, what motivates you. And so I kind of asked myself a question to say, okay, is this an idol or a lover in my life? So what would happen if God asked you to give that up? What if God said, okay, I want you to sell everything that you have, and I want you to go to, everyone thinks Africa's the worst place, so I want you to go to Africa and just kind of use that money and serve me. What goes on in our heart when we even hear that question? What if it wasn't me just saying it? What if it really was God? What if God wanted to put you in an environment that was really poor and difficult and hard? So when I ask myself that, right, and I think, okay, if this is God, I tense up. Don't we? It instills almost some fear or some loss. It's really like someone asking us to give up an addiction. It's an uncomfortableness. And it's an addiction because it's true. We're addicted to the good life because we think we have to have it. It's become an idol. And I'm not saying you can't have it. This is a heart question. And just so you know, Jesus talks about this, in case you think, that's Old Testament. Jesus talks about this. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. In other words, wherever your heart is, this is what your heart desires most. This is what you're pursuing most. This is your God, your idol, your lover. And he continues, no one can serve two masters. You will hate one or love the other. You'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. And you say, I might not be enslaved to money. By implication, we can just switch that out and say enslaved to the good life. Once again, now, as you hear that, this is not a problem with your will. This is not a problem with you, okay, all right, I'll move to Africa. This is a love problem. What do we really love? Why do we hold on so tightly to this good life? Number 2, second idol that you and I worship today. Google. And I'm not just talking the company. I'm talking about everything Google implies, all right? So Sheree and I were as we were on sabbatical in Hawaii, we went to this church, and they had a service. It was a night of healing. It was Sunday night. And just dealing with some of the stuff I was dealing with, I'm like, I'm going to that. Why wouldn't I go to that, right? I could use some healing in my life. And the guy gave a talk, and we had some prayer time afterwards, and it was very significant. It was great. But here's what this guy was talking about. He was talking about idol worship a little bit, and then he said, some of you, your idol is Google. And I'm like, whatever, Then he said this, what happens when you start to feel sick? What happens when you get a diagnosis you don't understand, and it strikes a little fear in your heart? Where do you go to first? Dr. Google. Who do we trust in all of our information? Because you and I know everything's true on the internet. But where do we go when we want to know the right way to think, the right way to vote, the right way to do this, the right way to do that? That hit me right here. Right here. Because before, maybe I would even pray. Before I would say, okay, God, you're God. I don't get this. I'm going to trust you. I'm not saying Google is bad or finding information is bad or what. We use the internet around here until it crashes or whatever. I don't know what's wrong. But we seek advice, right? What career should I go to? Should I buy this car or that car? This house or that house? What food should I eat to be healthy? Should I buy this or that? And we do our searches, and Google tells us. There's great constructive things that it informs us on, but who do we go to first? Would we ever think of praying, should I buy this house or that car or that, or how should I spend my money? Or God, what do you say about any of that? And you and I have become addicted to it. Do you notice that? You're driving along, and somebody asks a question. Sheree and I do this all the time. And, I wonder about this. And all of a sudden, the other person whips out their phone, and you're Googling it. I can find that out instantly. And we want to know information right now. So if something's wrong in our lives, we're not going to wait patiently for anything. We want it fixed now. Give me that right information now. And I want to know what's right now. In my personal Bible reading, I'm reading through the book of 1 Kings. And like many of the Old Testament books, it tells the story of how the nation of Israel, they slipped away from their love of God, and they started loving other idols and believing that these other gods would provide for them. I encourage you to read 1 Kings or start in the book of Judges and read through that. Because if you understand the heart of it, it gets to the heart of this. And I came across this reading this morning. King Ahab, you ever heard of Ahab and Jezebel? Someone who's really evil, it's like, don't be a Jezebel. You've heard that? Well, that comes from this story. just read these couple of verses. No one was so completely sold himself to what was evil in the Lord's sight as Ahab did under the influence of his wife Jezebel. His worst outrage was worshiping idols. So of all the corrupt things that he did, God says his worst thing is pursuing these other lovers. And sometimes I think we're not, even in our pursuit of God, we're not too different in our culture, because who do we look to really protect us, provide for us? We look to ourselves and what we can do. We look to get that right information so we can do the correct thing. And once again, I'm not saying Google is bad, but just this is a heart question to ask yourself. Okay, next lover we pursue. Great entertainment. And I have great in quotes. You would see it on the screen, but it's not there. Great entertainment. And I refer to great entertainment in the kind of entertainment we think is great, but also the amount of entertainment that we consume. So the amount of screen time, we've talked about this before, the amount on social media, the binge watching on our tablets, and even the news that we watch and the hours upon hours that some of you spend watching the news. And so just so you know, I just want to be real clear here. Yes, the news is entertainment. Why is that? It's not anymore just about keeping you informed. They are putting stories on there to lock you in, to stir up your emotions, your emotional response, so you will watch more and more and more. Because what does that do? That pays for advertisers more and more and more, and they make more money off their entertainment. And so this lover of entertainment demands two things from us. It demands our time and our money. And you will do anything to get it. We both will. It targets what is stimulating you. It targets your adrenaline. It targets your desires. It targets what you feel will bring comfort. And what it offers you is if you go into that, it's going to relieve your stress. It's going to relieve your fears and your worries. It offers you the, quote, me time that you feel like you deserve. And so from those who watch constant sports or reality TV, or you're scrolling through social media to pornography, it's meeting some need in your life for comfort and intimacy, and I would even say what we feel might be love. And so we buy it because we think it's going to bring us something. But it's like a counselor once told me, it's like eating a bag of chips and drinking a soda. Why do we sit down to a bag of chips? Not you, but why do I sit down with a bag of chips and a soda? Because it brings comfort. It feels good, and it gives me what I'm craving. And in the moment, it might help my feelings, but in the end, what is it? It's empty, and it's not good for you at all. Now, I'm not against entertainment. I'm not against sports. I love watching sports. But what happens if I go to those things because my motivation is I'm going to experience rest here? I'm going to renew myself by spending enormous amount of times here. And if that's the case, that becomes a barrier. It becomes another lover because it's deceptive. It's a problem because what's it doing? It's pulling us away from what really will renew us. It's pulling away from a love that will really restore us. And it consumes so much of our time that we think, and this is true, I've heard people tell me, I just don't have time to spend with God. Here's a practical example. They've run studies on this, and it might be more now, but the average person spends 4 hours of screen time every day. 4 hours. And that's, TV, whatever. I'm not talking work. You're looking at the screen at work. I'm not talking that. I'm talking entertainment. But, I just don't seem to have time to read my Bible. Let's say you'd say that. Well, if that's 4 hours. They've actually calculated that for you to read the Bible all the way through, it would take, around 70 hours. So if you took that screen time, right, and said, okay, I'm going to read my Bible through the whole thing, do you know you would read the Bible in under a month? The whole thing. Now, I'm not saying 4 hours of Bible reading, let's go to a church, we're all going to do it. That would last not even a day, all right? But, and too often when, we're doing all that kind of stuff, we become very self-righteous. It's all these bragging rights. I'm not saying that, but think about it. You could easily read through the Bible in a year, or you say, okay, you could easily read a chapter or two, think on it, journal on it, pray about it, and maybe for 30 minutes a day, because you have 4 hours that you've just done X with. But, I can't. I don't have time. Do you see the conflict? You see how it pulls us away? We think this is where we're regenerating ourselves, but in the end, it's not. Our culture is on the rise of fear and anxiety and worry and depression and despair because we're not resting. We're not renewing. The other lover has very seriously gotten in the way. And the danger of it is the amount, how great the amount is. Once again, I'm not against all of it. The danger is we put away Jesus in order to, get these other needs stimulated and met. And a lot of times it's deceptive, it's false. That's why the songwriter would sing this, I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. Is there anything worthless we're watching? Is there anything that will pull me down? Is there anything that will drag me away? Is there anything that will entice me away from God's best? That's why John writes to the church, do not love this world nor the things of the world. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. So the answer to this is not just, I'm not giving you Christian rules. I'm not giving you Christian legalism. This is the love issue. This is a first love problem. We spend time with what we love. Okay, last lover we're going to talk about today. And I better sit down for this one. In quotes. Good, in quotes. Sex. In quotes, good sex. So I have the word good in quotes because it's what we think is good. I just want you to know right from the very beginning, there is nothing wrong with sex, God's way. When God created it, when God designed it, He said it was good. He said more than that. He said it is very good. And that was in the context of a marriage between a man and a woman. And so sex, God's way, is supposed to be held in highest honor and great blessing in marriage. That's why the writer of Hebrews writes this, give honor to marriage, remain faithful to one another in marriage. God will surely judge people who are immoral and those who commit adultery. Because sex outside, in our culture today, sex outside of marriage has become another lover. It's become an idol. It's something that I believe our culture and many cultures in the world worship. Because it's flaunted, it's actually celebrated outside of God's design. And what's happened over time is we've begun to think of this as normal, as something, it's just the way it is today. And there's nothing really wrong with it today. And we pursue it. We go hard after it. I mean, one of the main goals kids are growing up today with is that, okay, in order for me to have this good life, I got to be hooking up with somebody else. And we just think as parents and even grandparents, it's just the way it is. And I just want you to know it takes very, sometimes long and serious conversations with people to even help them see that this is outside of God's best for them. This is outside of His plan, His original design, of where it can be experienced as good and holy and right, and not just for pleasure, but just an overwhelming intimacy and love that you need. And just don't worry this morning, I'm not going to give you the big sex talk, all right? Some time ago we covered that as we went through Corinthians. And so you can go ahead and read 1 Corinthians chapter 6 if you want. And just kind of read what God's best is around this. And you need to hear God's heart on it. It's not about Him trying to rain on a parade or provide all these rules and old-fashioned and, it's not about that. It's about how He's designed us, how He's made us, what it's actually for, a great blessing to a married couple, a great blessing for human life itself. It's a good thing, but in almost every possible way, we've rejected the good thing and we have pursued another idol. And we have said, our culture says, you can have everything going wrong in your life, but if you have a good, quote, good sex life, you're fine. And what that's saying is, it's saying, no, God, the worship of you, and what you have to say, no, I know what's better, I'm doing this instead. And the results of it has brought destruction. It's brought hardship. And yet, despite the hardship, despite the broken families, despite children growing up confused and disillusioned and pursuing whatever for themselves, and despite all the images that they see, all the advertisements that we see, we still trust it, we still go after it, and we still want more of it, and it keeps wreaking more havoc on our lives. Just like the nation of Israel who worshiped idols around it, we privately, even as Christians, worship this idol because it's everywhere. And as we privately worship this idol of sex, it's become a deep hypocrisy within the church. And we can look to and say, oh, look at all that church over there and the priests and everything they're doing over there. And oh, look at all of that. And we don't see what's happening in our own lives, in our own world, with our own kids. And it's a deep hypocrisy within the church today. It's just... So for instance, here's an example. So many Christians today would say they're pro-life, right? Meaning that we believe in the preservation of life at conception and then until they die. And so we here at Hope, we are pro-life. We call it pro-life, pro-love. And that's not just a political stance. It means we want to do something about it. We're pro-life. We want to, help people who are dealing with unwanted pregnancies. We want to give to a resource that's helping our community. And many of us would say yes and amen to that. And some of you would get real excited about that. And you would say, yes, that affects my political vote. It gets me fired up. I want to be about this community activism. So I just want to say to all that, okay, whatever, that's fine, but back up the train. Where does this life come from? Sex. Right? And why is there so much sex happening? Because it's celebrated, it's bought, it's watched by everyone. So I'm going to say something rather carefully, and I'm going to say something rather directly. So there are many of you men in the church today, and it's great. You're very anti-abortion, and that's fine. That's great. It's biblical. You're anti-abortion, but you're treating sex outside of marriage very lightly. Sex outside of marriage very casually. So before you're married, maybe it came with how you treated your girlfriend. But maybe now it's what you watch on TV or the porn you're looking at on your phone. On one hand, you're really angry about the abortion, and yet on the other hand, your personal sex life outside of marriage is on the slide. You see the conflict there? And yes, there are many pregnancies that are happening, but why is that? Because there's so much sex. And why is there so much sex? Is because we've idolized it, we've glorified it, and we feed it. So before we get all angry at one thing and start throwing stones at it, we need to understand maybe where our hearts have been and what we've been looking at and what we've been watching and how we are giving attention to it and with your money and your resources and your time and whatever it is. How do you value women? What jokes do you laugh at work? It has become a huge God, small g, huge God in our lives. So how do we need to grow up in that? How do we need to grow into what God has out of his first love for us, for sex in all of its beauty, for sex in all of its intimacy of marriage? Do you know there's a whole book of Bible around this? It's called the Song of Solomon. And it's meant to be read, right? If it's in the Bible, it's meant to be read in worship, not like a snickering teenager. Look what it says. Read it. The beauty of what God has provided the beauty of what real love is about. It's that change of thinking and that shift to say, no, I don't want to love this other lover that's drawing my attention. It's going to lead in a dead end. I want to pursue God's best. And once again, it's just not more willpower here. It's just not some strict, old-fashioned rules we need to obey. This is about, not just about, what happens if I get caught? This is not about that. This is a love issue. Where are we going for love? Who and what will we love? And if we're struggling with that, it's really because we don't understand God's great love for us. Can we discover that love? Can we discover that mercy, that forgiveness, no matter where we've been, no matter how much shame we're experiencing for any kind of sexual sin in the past? Can we realize that His love changes all of that? It changes everything with that. And that just not needs to be told in this context here with all the mature adults. This is the stuff we have to be talking with our children and our teenagers. That this is a love problem. This isn't a sex problem. Do we really pursue and experience the love of God in our lives? Do we allow the very deep, deep love of Jesus to wash over us in so many ways that it melts away these other desires? Because that's what happens. You know that? As you experience, that's the only way I know. That's the only way I know, is to experience more of the love of Christ in my life somehow, that it just washes it away. I'm not some dead inside man. It's not like I'm not the only guy in the room who has no problem with, these sex kind of issues. That's a bunch of nonsense if anyone's breathing in this room. But we have to say, where am I going for love? And the only answer that I know is to experience the love of Christ. This goes back to the very first commandment, all right? See what God says around this. As we love Him with heart, soul, and mind, but I, God says, lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who do what? Who love and obey my commands. Love precedes obedience, even in the Old Testament. Love does. Love is what causes us to want to obey, because we've realized everything that God's done for us. So here's my challenge to you this week. Around perhaps the heaviness of what we've been talking about, would you just get alone with God on it? Would you just get alone and talk to Him and say, okay, God, I've seen in your word, I'm looking at these notes, and I realize that there's some other lovers in my life, whether it's pursuing the good life, whether it's the whole sex thing, whether it's the entertainment thing, whatever it is. I see that there's some other lovers in my life. Would you show me more of your love? So somehow I might experience that and then love you in return. And that's just not a 2-minute prayer while you're on your way to work, all right? I'm talking about, this is a time thing, some significant time. Maybe go for a walk. Maybe somehow find a quiet room in the house, and maybe even kneel down and just be honest with God and say, yeah, there's some other loves in my life. And then here's second encouragement around that. Do you have a Christian friend to talk to about it? I really encourage that. Because there's something that happens. Because if we've experienced shame around any of these kind of issues, there's something happens that as we just talk to a Christian friend, the shame melts away. And as we experience the love of a friend who still loves us despite our mess, right? We experience the very love of God. And that is what frees us. Jesus desires to meet you intimately. Jesus is not someone, when we struggle with these things, oh, you got this other lover in your life. He's not saying, well, when you get that straight, come back to me. No, He is with us in it and is wanting. That's why His ministry exists, is to come alongside of us and bring us in to experience more of His love when we feel like we failed. So can I just pray around that? God, I just would pray around what's happening in our lives, pursuing other things. I think all of us And I would say a big yes and amen to myself. There's been other things I've been pursuing. Other lovers that I've looked at or I've sought after to meet needs in my life. And I just want to say, and I think we all want to say, Jesus, we want to love you more. We want to go after you more because we just know only you satisfy the deepest longings, the deepest rest and renewal that we need. And it's hard. So God, I just would pray that you would just speak to each one. I pray that they could find rest in your love. They could find forgiveness and mercy and grace that gets extended to them every minute of every day. And as they discover that they just would want, that we would just want you more. That we would seek to be satisfied in you. Amen. Jared is going to sing a familiar song to you. I'll just let him encourage you in resting in his love.
Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast unmeasured, boundless free, rolling as a mighty ocean. He needs fullness over me. Underneath me, all around me, is the current of his love, leading onward, leading on to thy glorious rest above. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, 'tis our heaven of heavens to be, and it lifts me up to glory, for it lifts me up to thee. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, spread his praise from shore to shore. How he loveth, ever loveth, changeth never, evermore.
Would you stand? God, I pray today that we would leave here convicted but encouraged, wanting to dive deeper into your love, that we might really understand how wide, how long, the breadth of your love for us, Jesus. So do your work in our hearts this week, I pray. It's your work, Jesus, for your glory we ask. Amen. Amen.